Welcome to this edition of Psychedelic Radio. I'm Christina Thomas, the president and founder of Myself Wellness, and my co-host is Charles Patty. Together, we co-founded the Warriors of Consciousness, a not-for-profit to help people gain access to psychedelic ketamine therapy. Together, we are on a mission to help save and transform lives through this treatment. In this podcast, we'll be pushing boundaries, breaking taboos, and shedding light on the use of psychedelic medicines. We want to share expert knowledge and firsthand accounts of those who've experienced transformative psychic shifts using psychedelics. Journeying with us today is Dr. Rick Strassman. We are so excited for this call.
Yes, we are.
We want to say thank you to Dr. Rick for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Thank you. Dr. Strassman has obtained his undergraduate degree in biological sciences from Stanford University and his medical degree from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He's trained in general psychiatry at the UC Davis Medical Center and took clinical psychopharmacology research and fellowship at UC San Diego. At the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, his clinical research team discovered the first known function of melatonin in humans. And between 1990 and 1995, he performed the first U.S. clinical research with DMT. He's authored and co-authored nearly 50 peer-reviewed papers, has served as a guest editor and reviewer of numerous scientific journals, and consulted with various government, nonprofit, and for-profit entities. His book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, has been translated in over 14 languages and is the basis of a successful independent documentary, which is one of Charles's favorite documentaries.
Oh, thanks. It's a fun movie.
It is. It's great.
To not even joke around with you, I think I've watched it over 50 times.
Oh, that's more than I have. I've watched it 13 times, and every time there's something new.
Yes. No. So just to let you know, sir, you're really I have so much respect for you, and I've been dreaming of this moment for a decade. So I appreciate you and your service to humanity, and to be completely honest with you, and for all the listeners out there, your work helped save my life. I quit a heroin addiction from a DMT experience. Wow. And I had learned a lot about DMT through just following you and watching your documentary. And I actually used your documentary to integrate myself a lot after my experiences, just because I didn't really have anybody to talk to about all this stuff. So
yeah, well, great. Well, I'm glad to be helpful.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So I guess let's go ahead and get down to the nuts and bolts of it. And you have a new book that has come out, and I would love to the Psychedelic Handbook. I would love to go ahead and talk about that with you.
Sure. Yeah. It came out in August. I was on the Joe Rogan Experience on August 9th, which coincided with the book's release. It's a small textbook. It's under 200 pages, and it covers the basics from the point of view of somebody that's been in the field for a long time. I feel that with the hype which is associated with psychedelics these days, it's good to have kind of a moderating or moderate point of view. The book doesn't come out as advocating taking psychedelics or avoid taking psychedelics. It advocates educating yourself about psychedelics. To know their history, their effects, how they work, what they're good for, what potential negative reactions might be. Each of the drugs, their pharmacology and their effects, side effects, the law, microdosing, things like that. The largest chapter in the book is called How to Trip. And it's intended to provide some practical guidance about preparing yourself, both long-term and short-term, setting things up, thinking about your intent, which would then determine what compound you would use, in what kind of an environment, the dose that you would choose. safety mechanisms to call upon if you get into any trouble, integration questions, those kinds of things. So it covers the most popular compounds, the classical psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and ayahuasca. It includes MDMA. It includes ketamine and ibogaine, 5-methoxy, DMT, which is the toad, and Salvia, divinorum. So it's kind of a how-to, go-to book. Short, pretty packed, but still I think it should prove valuable over the long run as a standard reference, for the next few years.
No, I love it, and I really love the book. It's for everybody out there. It's an easy read. It's really easy to comprehend, and it really does get into all of the, the nuts and bolts of really this psychedelic renaissance and all of the different compounds and medicines and the appropriate way to go about things. I guess one question I would really like to ask you or just to talk about would be, when we do psychedelic ketamine therapy out of our facility, and when I talk to our clients that have psychedelic experience, I relate in a way like an intramuscular shot of ketamine at the right doses can be very comparable in my eyes to like almost like an hour-long DMT experience. And I'm wondering if what your thoughts are of why these two compounds with the actual experiences correlate so much compared to other psychedelic compounds out there.
Well, the chemistry or the pharmacology of the two compounds is quite different. DMT is what's called a classical psychedelic. It stimulates the serotonin 2A receptors. And ketamine is a synthetic drug, and it stimulates the NMDA receptors. It's a blockader of N-methyl-D-aspartate receptors. So it's a completely different mechanism of action. Interestingly, though, they seem to have comparable effects on the brain. Connectivity increases between areas that don't normally communicate. The strength of connections within the part of the brain that seems to regulate one's sense of self kind of loosen up. So you're more susceptible to influences from your unconscious, from your feelings, your emotions, your memories, which may not be normally accessible. So even though their pharmacology is different at the cellular level, they still seem to have similar effects at the global level, at the function of the whole brain. They also seem to have comparable effects on what's called neurogenesis, which is the growth of new neurons from stem cells, and also on neuroplasticity, which means increased complexity of connections among neurons. So for the classical compounds, I think psilocybin's been the most well studied, but a single exposure to psilocybin of neurons in a test tube increases neuroplasticity and neurogenesis for up to a month. With ketamine, it's shorter, but still it extends out to at least a week. So even though the pharmacology differs between the two compounds, they also have comparable effects on the growth of new neurons and the complexity of connections among neurons. Subjectively, they're comparable too. You dissociate, you're out of your body, you enter into some kind of world of light, which can seem inhabited with intelligent power, and you can interact with the state and the contents thereof. So I think we don't really we're just beginning to learn about the mechanisms of these drugs. We understand a lot at the cellular level and what they're doing in the brains of lower animals, but still, the relationship between acute subjective experience in people and the outcome, if you need to include psychotherapy with ketamine or other psychedelic assisted therapy or not, and if so, what kind of therapy? Maybe no therapy, maybe no subjective experience still produces beneficial effects. So it's only just the last couple of years that people are honing in on the relevant questions.
Okay, beautiful. So there, I know in the field that there's there's a lot of talk about taking the psychedelic experience out of certain compounds. Like I know that there's a company and they're working on a DMT transdermal patch, and they're actually doing this without the actual psychedelic experience attached to that. What are your beliefs on what, like, first of all, if you were to take the psychedelic actual part out of the experience, is it going to still cause the new neurogenesis like it would if you would actually have the compound in there? Is there going to be any difference in the actual physiological stuff?
Yeah. Well, that's an important question, and people are spending quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money on coming up with answers. Well, there's two avenues of approaching that question. One is to give sub-psychedelic doses of classical compounds. So if you're giving if you're going to be administering a DMT patch, there would be extremely slow release, and it would be kind of like continual microdosing, as it were. So there wouldn't be discernible subjective experience. In studies of animals, you can give sub-psychedelic doses of classical compounds, including psilocybin or DMT, and you can still see neurogenesis and increased neuroplasticity. So in our study, giving a number of different doses of DMT, we determined sub-psychedelic doses, and those didn't increase heart rate or blood pressure either. And I'm consulting with a group in Canada. It's a group called Algernon. So they're working on treating stroke patients, both acutely and in rehabilitation, with a continuous infusion over several hours of sub-psychedelic doses of DMT in order to capitalize on the brain growth effects without any psychedelic effects. Well, so that's one approach. The other is developing new compounds which are based on the scaffolding of the classical compounds, and they stimulate the same receptor in the brain, the serotonin 2A site, and they stimulate nerve growth, but they don't, at least in lower animals, produce behavioral psychedelic effects. The two compounds which are being most studied in that regard are like a cousin of DMT and a cousin of ibogaine, which is psychedelic from Africa, which is quite helpful in treating addiction. So both of those compounds stimulate nerve growth and also seem to demonstrate, at least in lower animals, no behavioral effects, but also seem to improve the symptoms in lower animals of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. those studies or those compounds have not been administered to humans yet, as far as I can tell. And I think if they are going to see prime time, they would turn out to be like super antidepressants. Because antidepressants, like the SSRIs, will stimulate nerve growth. But in most people, if you take serotonin, if you take SSRIs, there isn't usually any kind of an acute response. You're not high, you're not low, things don't sparkle. You might have, some, side effects, like, some nausea, let's say, but acute, psychedelic effects or acute subjective effects aren't usually, part of taking SSRIs. So I think these new compounds, if they are studied in humans, may end up stimulating neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, which can be beneficial, and spare the psychedelic effects. Most people with depression, alcoholism, anxiety, just want to feel better. They don't want to trip. And if they can be spared 6 or 8 hours of being out in the cosmos, but still their depression improves, or their anxiety improves, I think they will. I think that there will be a much larger market.
For sure, being in the cosmos that long is a commitment.
It's a commitment all the way around, and you have more adverse effects the more stoned you get. So I think it'll be for most cases. That's not to say that people are going to stop being interested in tripping, but I think it will increase the range of options out there.
Definitely.
Yeah. I have hundreds of psychedelic experiences. I used it for the therapeutic value towards the end of my psychedelic journey. And I don't take psychedelic compounds anymore. The truth is that, for me personally, I feel like a lot of my healing journey propelled forward because of some of the psychospiritual effects of the medicine. I had experiences where I traveled to parallel universes or alternate dimensions and had contact with entities or higher dimensional beings, or whatever label people want to put on this. Do you think, from what you've seen in your studies, that there's a big factor of the healing benefit that comes from these more or less magical experiences, or like where people are receiving guidance telepathically from entities, or whatever they might be? Because I know that had such a profound effect on my life and really propelled me forward in the direction that I went on my healing journey. Do you think that people are going to have the healing or get the results without actually having those kind of experiences?
Well, those studies still need to be done, but still, that being said, I think that in tough cases, that a big trip will be necessary.
Yeah.
To just shake things up subjectively in one's life. But in tough cases, you use tougher medicine, which both can be more helpful, but at the same time, you may cause more side effects. So I think it's a case by case situation. You want to have as many tools in your tool chest. So if you give a non-psychedelic compound or a small dose of a psychedelic one, and you don't see much movement, you will want to be able to resort to the big guns if necessary.
For sure.
I feel like Charles doesn't let me speak because he just wants to pick your brain so bad.
I've been waiting for this for so long. Honestly, I have no idea what an honor this is. This is just like my dream come true. So go ahead.
I always like to know, what made you get involved with this? Like, how did you start, in the 90s studying DMT? I mean, what made you passionate about the field of psychedelics?
Well, it was, mostly a case research being research. Um, when I was younger, the first cannabis experience that I had was totally psychedelic, like absolutely, like you know. Purple clouds coming out of my speakers and the floor melting away under my rug, and my roommate and I were flying over Claremont, California, sharing a hallucination. um, so I started college as a chemistry major. As a kid, I was interested in making bombs and making fireworks. um, so I was completely normal, and then smoked this cannabis, and then I was completely out there, and I thought, it's chemistry. That's what it is. It's brain chemistry, which has opened up this incredible portal to a completely different reality. So I got the bug even when I was 18 years old. And then a couple of years later, I was doing research, learning about, clinical research, pharmacology, embryology research, and, decided if the, time ever was right again, that I would want to study psychedelic drugs, psychopharmacology. So I, made that, promise to myself when I was 20. And then went to medical school, psychiatry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so I had that flash in 1972 that I'm going to study psychedelics, and then gave our first dose of DMT in 1990. So that was an 18-year nose to the grindstone. I was going to do this if I could, and if anybody was going to do it at that time, it was going to be me, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was just like an obsession. And
Wow.
that's
I love it.
And so
that's
you're
the
doing the
way.
DMT, and they weren't smoking it, right?
No,
You were
it was
injecting it?
IV. It was through IV, right?
Yeah, it was intravenous. Yeah,
How
if
much DMT is that?
well, smoking on a research unit can be tricky. And there's lung toxicity perhaps, and you cough and you don't get all of it in. So we were interested in duplicating field use, as it were, of DMT. So the smoked and the intravenous are fairly comparable in their time course.
So yeah, so I have around 40 breakthrough experiences of DMT under my belt, and I have to say
Smoking it,
and I have to say that compound is one of the most profound, amazing compounds on the planet, and it changed me forever. And I actually, what had happened is I had a ketamine MDMA experience years ago. It was my first breakthrough experience, where the entire room broke down to quantum mechanics. I could see all the energy vibrating, everything. I was projected out of my body into deep space through a geometric portal, where I was a being of light, and I was with higher dimensional beings, and received a bunch of guidance and things like that. And basically the way I got turned on to your work was, I got on the computer the next day and I started researching ketamine and aliens or ET experiences, and your work just started popping up, and DMT and the spirit molecule, and I started watching your film over and over and over again. And then I had actually got my hands on some DMT. But I have to say that once again, thank you for being so courageous. I know what your passion, like from your experience where you had this eye-opening experience, it was like, for me, it was the same thing. There was no going back. I knew what my purpose in life was. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I was just like, I need to help people have access to these kinds of experiences to heal. I need to have an opportunity to share this with the world. And in my eyes, you're really I refer to you as the godfather of DMT. So thank you so much.
He's fanboying over here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, it's not the first time. So yeah, and I take all of that with a real grain of salt too. So I'm just who I am, kind of neurotic, and I just do my best. Well, one of the most interesting things about DMT is it exists in the brain, and it's in quite high concentrations. So it may actually turn out to be a neurotransmitter. which would be a very strange thing if it were true, because, what would it be regulating? Comparable to serotonin and mood, dopamine and energy. What does, DMT, moderate or, regulate? So.
When you talk about the pineal gland possibly being the source of endogenous DMT, I have to say from my own personal DMT experience, I felt my pineal gland light up like a crisp. I felt like it was going to explode. I felt like my brain was going to pop from the inside out.
Mhm.
And like, so like, I'm a huge believer in all of that. And I guess my question I'm really interested to hear is like, what are you up to these days? What are you doing these days?
Well, let's see, what am I doing? Well, I'm spending a lot of time, marketing the book.
Okay.
That's been occupying myself for the last maybe 2 months or so. Before that, I was writing the book. I was under, a pretty strict, timeline. My publisher, gave me 3 months, to write a textbook. So I was able to like expand that out, to 5 months, but still, it was a, fairly, short, leash, for the writing process. Um, yeah, so I'm just, doing interviews, mostly, occasional lectures. I've got, students I mentor. Um, I'm going to stop doing interviews on, in November and December. I'm not going to, do any more for the rest of the year after October's out. And then just kind of, survey the landscape. I've been studying the Hebrew Bible, quite, closely for 25, 26 years now. And I study that every morning. Comment, commentators, commentaries. Just, started reading the book of Esther this morning on a specific commentary. I work on my yard. I'm getting ready for the winter. The power out here is pretty sketchy, so I'm trying to find a backup generator.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was consulting a lot, like a lot, a couple of years ago with all of these, all of these, psychedelic, startups. Um, it was as if, the world, just discovered, that DMT work, from almost, 30 years ago, and I was in demand, for about a year. Was
A
spending a lot of time
commodity.
consulting.
Well,
Yeah,
see, the
and
thing, see, this is where my mind thought is like, like, I mean, we're immersed in the field and I'm going to all these events and I'm seeing all of these people that are paving the way in the industry. And I'm like, where's Dr. Rick Strassman at? And I just hadn't seen you. Like, I feel like you're the guy. In my eyes, you're the guy. So it's like, are you going to be taking more of a stance within the industry in the field, or are you just,
well, I don't think so. And it's because I'm not an advocate. Um, I'm not an advocate of people, taking psychedelics. I'm an advocate of people educating themselves. I'm learning about, uh, psychedelics. Then it's up to them if they're going, to, trip or not. And in what, kind of circumstances, with what kind of drug, what kind of doses, what kind of intention. Michael Pollan, completely ignores our work in his book or his books. Like there's one, reference, and there aren't any references in his book to any of our research, any of my writing at all. And I think it's because I don't advocate. I don't say, psychedelics are great and everybody should take them. I say, psychedelics are very weird and very powerful and can do this and can do that. So I think I don't quite fit the mold of a cheerleader, let's say. I more would like people to, know what they're getting into. And if you've got a pharmaceutical product or a retreat center, whose success hinges on presenting a particular view of these drugs and their experiences, I don't quite fit that mold. So in a way, I'm more of a commentator or moderator of the field, and I will continue active because I've got a good perspective, at least according to my bias. Yeah, so to the extent that people want to hear what what I have to say, I'm willing to continue saying it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And, it's kind of like the Wild West out there. And like you need to do it, with the right intention and with the right people, and not just, be taking these substances irresponsibly. Like, we're not advocates for the at-home ketamine, because it's very dangerous, and
Oh yeah.
It's a very powerful medication that you're sending to people's doorsteps. And a lot of these people don't have any other experiences. And then they have this earth-shattering experience. And
Yeah, no, and just so you know, like where we're at, like I tell people these medicines, and they are medicines, are a tool and a catalyst. This isn't the final answer, or like this isn't the answer. This is just the beginning. And really what my message out there is for people is like, this is what worked for me on my healing journey. But that being said, I don't use psychedelics anymore. I used them for the tool that they were meant to be used to get to where I'm at now. Now I do a lot of meditation, breath work, exercising, all of these healthy lifestyle changes, which is the real recipe for long-term success with the medicine.
Yeah, well, good. I'm pleased that you're presenting a level-headed approach
Yes, sir.
to the field. Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's kind of borders on irresponsibility.
100%.
Sending ketamine through the mail to people, and maybe doing a virtual therapy or follow-up session. It seems kind of reckless.
well, take the ketamine out of it. You're sending an anesthetic to people's doorstep.
Yeah. No.
Or yeah, and I think that's one of the dangers in emphasizing psilocybin over LSD. Is there is a German study came out a month or two ago comparing um, the acute subjective experience of LSD compared to psilocybin, and there was no difference in the acute subjective effects. The only difference was the duration of action. So when people are saying, oh, psilocybin's entheogenic and it's natural and it's organic and all that, and it ought to be dispensed liberally, would people still have that perspective if you were saying, yeah, people ought to dispense LSD without any compunctions, and mail order LSD, and pharmacists dispensing LSD? They're basically the same compound, or the same effect, and I think it was a bit of a stealth operation to emphasize psilocybin as opposed to LSD in some of the research centers out there, in order to take a more liberal, hands-off approach to people tripping. I think you'd need to really be responsible in administering and promoting, or making available these compounds.
I commend you and appreciate you for standing strong in the angle that you're taking with this and your position, because, I truly believe that people need to be incredibly responsible, use these medicines for the therapeutic value that they're being used for, use them properly, because not only could somebody get hurt, but, these medicines have the ability to help so many people, and all we need is the wrong thing to happen, and then these valuable tools get ripped out of everybody's hands like they once did when they got Schedule 1.
Yeah, I think we need to plan for that in a way. So far there haven't been lots of Pied Pipers out there. The closest is Michael Pollan, and the person who runs Decriminalize Nature, I can't remember his name. They're kind of messianic, and are overlooking the potential drawbacks. But compared to Tim Leary, for example, they're kind of low key still. Charles Manson used LSD. His followers used LSD, and that didn't really turn out that well. So I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't another episode like that, in which case we need to have a ready response, and that's where overemphasizing their potential benefits and underemphasizing their potential adverse effects might, come back at us in a not so good way.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
That's all the time that we have today. I want to say thank you again for journeying with us on this edition of Psychedelic Radio. To learn, go ahead.
Well, great. Well, thanks very much for having me on the show.
Thank you.
Sure.
To learn more about Dr. Strassman, please visit his website, rickstrassman.com. And you can download the past programs of our episodes by going to cannabisradio.com or by subscribing to our show, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. To learn more about Warriors of Consciousness, please visit us on social media or go to wocfund.org and watch the videos. And if nobody's told you that they love you lately, we do.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.